Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, wow, what an intro. And likewise, Janina, seriously, you inspire me. That's amazing. So hi everybody, I'm April. Thanks so much for having me here. It makes me so happy to look out and see your faces. So thank you for being here. I know it takes a lot more effort to come to events like this than just to, flip open a laptop in bed and, log onto a virtual event. So I applaud all of you for coming here. Thanks to the organizers for helping people reconnect. I think events like this are so valuable for the community, especially as we go through challenges like layoffs and AI taking all our jobs and all these things coming up. It's important for us to connect as humans. And so thank you for being here. And so my life has looked like this a lot for the past few years, and maybe yours has too. And it's had an impact on me. I read this article that really resonated. When I see that platforms such as Zoom provide some imitations of face-to-face interactions, what I notice the most is that I miss the three-dimensional faces and the bodies and the eyes and the breaths. And it's a very visceral description of what it feels like to not have this. And so it's great to be back in person and sharing that. So as Janina mentioned, I did come from San Diego. We have palm trees there too, so I feel quite at home here. So I have a little bit of an odd background for someone who talks about compassion. I spent a little over 15 years in software engineering and technical leadership roles at different startups and companies in Silicon Valley. And I was job hopping before it was cool, so I worked in health tech and education tech and gaming, research, all over the map really. And across all this experience, I noticed that we have some problems in tech. And some of those are conflict on teams that's not productive, stress and burnout. This seems to be getting worse every year, especially with the pandemic. Demoralizing job interviews. I don't know if anyone's on the job hunt, but those are no fun. Unsupportive working environments, products with poor user experience, although I will say people in the iOS community are definitely more mindful about that, and socially harmful products even. So that's why I started my company, Compassionate Coding, in 2016, because I wanted to bring in more of the human element and try to address some of these widespread problems that I saw. And so, I think that there's this common belief in tech that the hard skills are more important than the so-called soft skills. You may be thinking that now, like, I came here to learn about techie stuff. Why are we talking about the soft and fuzzy stuff? But probably not, maybe not, because you're here. But, the truth is that you are a human working with humans to create products for humans. And so, thinking about the human side is unavoidable, and it's really important. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, said at a commencement address that I'm not worried about artificial intelligence giving computers the ability to think like humans. I'm more concerned about people thinking like computers, without values or compassion, without concern for consequences. And so, this to me is really the concern to have, is especially for us developers that spend so much time on the computer, is we have to be careful that we don't take on too many of the tendencies of the computers that we use. So there are also some personal benefits to compassion that are worth mentioning. It can reduce your stress and anxiety, it leads to more satisfying relationships, more job satisfaction, and increased resilience. So when things go wrong, you're better able to bounce back. Okay, so the plan for the rest of the talk, in the short time I have with you, I want to focus on these things. The why of compassion, which we just covered, so check. The what do we really mean by compassion? And then how, some practical tips on how you can apply it in your day-to-day coding life. So I will share, I'm coming from America, from California, from San Diego, and different cultures, people here are probably from all over the place, right? And different cultures have different ways of expressing emotions and confronting conflict or avoiding it. And so, just to make a note here of that, and, if there are things that I mentioned that don't resonate with you, you can just, ignore those. And, these are just suggestions, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so what is compassion? So just, take a moment. What comes to your mind when you hear compassion? Maybe empathy. Maybe, a lot of times people say empathy. Maybe soft, being nice, something like that. So compassion is not just about being fake nice and putting on a happy face when you're not actually happy. Compassion is not being irrational. So I think sometimes in tech, we're reluctant to embrace our emotions because we think that they'll make us irrational. But that's not really the case with compassion. Compassion's also not about being a doormat. So that means it's not about letting people walk all over you and never being able to stand up for yourself. Compassion is also not walking on eggshells where you have to be so careful about every little thing you say. In fact, I think that can sometimes get in the way of compassion. So to clarify, I like this definition of compassion. There are a few out there. This one comes from UC Berkeley University in California. Compassion is the feeling that arises when you are confronted with suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. So you see somebody hurting, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else, and you want to do something about it. So another way to look at it is that compassion is kind of like empathy, where you understand what someone's going through, and action, where you want to do something about it. So to make it a little more concrete, one example, you see somebody burn their hands on a hot stove. Sympathy might say, "Oh, you poor thing." Empathy, ouch, I feel your pain, so you feel along with them. Compassion, can I bandage that up for you? So this is one kind of conception of it. Different people define them in different ways, but I like this because it kind of lays out why I choose compassion in addition to empathy, so not stopping just at empathy. So that's what I mean by compassion. Okay. So we've covered the why, we've covered the what. For the bulk of the talk, the remainder here, we're going to be speaking about the how. So I like to do this by starting with the core here of compassion for yourself, then moving out to compassion for your collaborators, and finally ending with how we can practice compassion towards our users and society at large. So we'll start with the self. So, I give talks on compassion all over the world, and sometimes, and I like to tailor them to wherever I'm going. So I'll look up to see, and I sometimes pause and think, well, I usually talk about burnout, but maybe burnout's not a problem in this country, so I should do some research. And every single time I find an article like this one, the epidemic of stress plaguing Singaporean workers. And I know, people are here from all over, but like I said, usually there's something like this. So this article is from late last year, and they talk about how most people in their workday, around half, end their workday feeling exhausted, and they also said 43% say mental health is negatively impacting their productivity. So this is why it's important to talk about self-compassion. I think sometimes we have this idea, especially in tech, that we're not supposed to have emotions, we're not supposed to go through hard times, we're supposed to show up at work and act like a diligent robot, cranking out our widgets, doing our job, and never feeling anything. And the problem is that that's not the case. So you're not a robot. You have emotions, whether you process them, whether you admit them, whether you know you're having them. You do as a human being. And you need rest is the other thing. So we can run computers for a long time and just leave them going, but the same thing doesn't quite work for human beings. So another point to make here is it's not selfish to take care of yourself because, as this metaphor says, you can't pour from an empty cup, meaning that if you're not filling your own resources, you're not going to have anything to give. So, I do a lot of these talks, and people often share things afterwards of very, personal, trying, difficult problems they're going through. And I kind of, in order to be able to manage all of that and connect emotionally with people, I have to do a lot of self-care myself. And so Janina mentioned I post a lot of pictures of heart rocks that I find, and part of that's because, I need to spend a lot of time in nature recharging. And so for me, and for a lot of people, and especially in tech that's so fast-moving, one of the first things we can do out of self-compassion is just to slow down, to take a break sometimes. I liked in Vina's talk that she talked about, setting those break points. I mean, what a great suggestion there. Spending time in nature. So this is a photo from near where I live. It's one of the trails I go running on. And this quote from Richard Louv I really like: "The more high-tech we become, the more nature we need." And so I think sometimes people follow me on Twitter and they'll be like, "You just post pictures of sunsets, are you even a coder?" And I'm like, well, yes, but I don't always feel like wanting to post pictures of code or whatever. I like to post pictures of sunsets because they make me happy, or nature trails or whatever it is. And so I think, especially as AI comes into things, as we live in this remote world, any connection we can make to nature, I feel like super important. So another aspect of self-compassion is that a lot of times when we make mistakes, we beat ourselves up in our head. And we think, oh, that was such a stupid mistake. How could I have done that? And so there's this idea from Kristen Neff. She's a researcher who talks about self-compassion. And she says, talk to yourself in your head as you would to a good friend. And I like to think of a puppy instead, because I feel like, how could you call this puppy an idiot, right? You can't do that. Such a cutie, look at those eyes. So, but for developers, so these are commit messages, and they all say, I'm an idiot, okay? And so it's not our default necessarily to be self-compassionate. So, next time you're tempted to write that, think of that little puppy, okay? But, and I know some of it's self-deprecating humor, but there's something, if we always make jokes like that about ourselves, sometimes we can start to believe it. And so it's kind of risky to joke like that all the time. So another aspect of self-compassion is setting boundaries. So sometimes people think compassion is this soft and fuzzy thing and, just being nice and avoiding conflict, but really it's not. Sometimes you have to speak up and be assertive and advocate for yourself, and that's compassionate as well. And so that might mean setting boundaries with your boss or your coworkers about when you're gonna be available, maybe in your family, whatever it may be. So that's another aspect of self-compassion that often goes overlooked. And I will say connecting with community. So I also loved what Vina said about that, which is, this can be a really nourishing event if you choose to make it that. If you take that opportunity to meet somebody new, to connect with someone new, you never know what magic comes from that. Probably I'm standing here today because Natasha Murashev, do people know her? She's very famous, probably everyone knows here. She's very big in the Swift community. I might be mispronouncing her name, but I met her at a meetup a really long time ago in the Bay Area. She invited me to speak at Try Swift NYC in 2018, and somehow that led to this, so, and here I am. So you never know what those kind of chance connections might lead to down the line. Plus, it's just nice to have somebody who understands what it's like you can commiserate over what the job market is like or whatever. Okay, so. And we'll get to more of this community aspect in the next piece. We talked about the self. Now on to how do you practice compassion for your collaborators? Okay, so here's some code. You probably didn't expect to see code in this, quote unquote soft talk, but here we go. So this is the best code I've ever written. No, I'm just kidding. But so is this compassionate code? Anyone think this is compassionate code by a show of hands here? Okay, no, I would say no. And although maybe, but in case you can't tell, but if you are applying to jobs, maybe you can tell, it's a bubble sort, but not the best variable names. So the reason I would say this is not compassionate code is it doesn't take into consideration who's going to be reading the code and make it easy to read. It's kind of uses variable names that are not descriptive, et cetera. So this is kind of an obvious one, but it really applies to any sort of clean code things we speak about. It's really about thinking about who's going to be reading and maintaining our code. So who will be reading or using your code, what variable names, and even architecture decisions will help them understand and modify your code down the line. That person might be you, or it might be a collaborator. So another one to think about is code review. So my talk at Try Swift was actually on compassionate code reviews, because it's something I think about a lot. Here's a code review that's been censored a bit to spare you. The above code is bleep, and it generates bleep code. It looks bad, and there's no reason for it. The code could easily have been done with just a single and understandable conditional. I really see no reason for this kind of complete idiotic bleep. Okay, so is this a compassionate code review? Probably not. And this would probably not meet the Swift code of conduct, being respectful of differing viewpoints and showing empathy. And so, how might we rephrase something like that? Well, so what's important when we see something like that is the person who wrote that on a Linux mailing list, I'll leave that nameless for now, who wrote it, but very famous programmer. And the thing is, it is compassionate in the sense of he's very passionate and committed to the quality of the code, and so he thinks he's kind of protecting himself and the community by expecting really good quality code that matches his standards, right? So there is some compassion there. It's just about how it comes out, right? And so another way you might phrase something like this: I'm concerned that the structure in the above code will make it difficult for future contributors to understand and maintain. We could use a single conditional to simplify this. What do you think, right? Compassionate, still gets the point across. So that's just one example. Like I said, I gave this talk where I give more specific examples, and that's available online, so I won't go further into that now. Okay, so another thing that I notice in tech is that we often think in binary terms. Tabs versus spaces, iPhone versus Android. I think I know what would win in this room. The right way versus the wrong way, good code versus bad code. We see the world in these kind of Boolean terms like we're used to in the code, but humans don't work like that as much as we might want them to. So anytime two people come together, one person's bringing their experiences, their emotions, their values, everything they've been through in their life, all of that, their belief system, everything like that. The other person is bringing their own set of experiences, emotions, and values. And so all of that is going to shape, and the circumstances are going to shape how they perceive any given situation. And so that might lead to disagreements. So one person might see a dress as blue and black. One person might see it as white and gold. And it might be hard to come to an agreement because they both are very convinced in what they're seeing. Like, it looks different between my laptop and up here, like, anyway. But more often, it's something like this, where one person sees this projection on the left in the red of the square, the other person sees a circle in the blue, and so those are both true in the sense of that's what those people see, but the truth is in the middle. And so the key with communication, especially when it comes to disagreement and applying compassion, is trying to get to that truth by combining the information you get with everybody involved in the situation. And you can't do that if you only think in binary terms, because it turns out that the solution is not the left or the right, but it's none of the above, it's something in the middle. So avoid binary thinking. Stay curious about other points of view and look for that common ground. That's the key. So, your coworker might ask for more meetings, and they might value connection and efficiency because they think it's just faster if we have a conversation about this rather than go back and forth over email. You want fewer meetings because you value focus and efficiency, so you just want to have focused time to get things done, and you don't want to have a bunch of meetings in your calendar, right? But see, I underlined efficiency because you do have something in common. You both want to get the work done, you just disagree about the best way to go about it. And so it's important to find that common ground because that can be how you make progress in seemingly difficult situations. A fun graphic that kind of explains this is, in unhealthy conflict, we have you versus me, and in healthy conflict, we have you and me versus the problem. And so in that previous example, the problem is you want to have an efficient system of communication between you and your coworker. It's not you against your coworker. Okay. So, moving forward, the last piece is about society. So how we can have compassion for our users and for the larger society. So technology can help us connect, absolutely. It has a lot of benefits in that way. I think COVID would have been a lot more difficult if we didn't have technology to be able to connect us. Technology can save lives. We have medical devices. Where I live in San Diego, there's a big medical device community, and they are, what they create often saves lives or improves lives, so technology is really powerful in that way. Technology can entertain us. It can do all sorts of these wonderful positive things. That's probably why we all work in it, right, is we enjoy the positive things that technology can do. The problem is there's other things technology can do. It can be confusing. So sometimes our user interfaces are not the most straightforward. They do confuse people. People get lost. Technology can be addictive. Some people spend way too much time on technology, and it hurts their mental health. We're seeing more and more studies about this and how especially affects teens who get addicted to social media and all of that it can have long-term effects on their mental health. And technology can be dangerous. Technology can be used in weapons. It can be used to do harm in the world. And so as developers, how do we factor that in? How do we deal with that? And so for that, I will get back to, I'll talk about the title of the talk. So PEBCAC. So is anybody is familiar with this? You don't have to say, but if you raise your hand, if you heard this abbreviation before, PEBCAC, it sometimes goes by some other names. So a few people. So it stands for problem exists between keyboard and chair. And if you think about it, it may take a second to realize, but between the keyboard and the chair, that's the person, right? So the way it was used is often, like, let's say somebody calls a help desk and says, oh, this website's broken, it's just not working, and it's really that the user didn't enter their password correctly, right? Then it was sort of a kind of funny way, sarcastic way for developers or IT support people to say, oh, it's user error. And so to kind of make fun of the user a bit, oh, like the bug is in the problem, is the problem between the keyboard and the chair, so it's human error. And unfortunately, that's kind of indicative of how a lot of times we think about our users in tech. So this is a poll, again, of some commit messages. Clarification for stupid users, added UI element so idiot users don't whine, being smarter for the stupid user, do default value for stupid users, etc. Have a lot here. Be nicer to the stupid user. Interesting one there. Sometimes the way that developers have thought about our users is not in the most respectful or definitely not the most compassionate way. And so, I would say that actually the most important part of technology is found between the keyboard and the chair. Whether we're talking about your users or you when you're creating the technology, like, that's the important piece. And, I don't have time here to go into depth on user testing and whatnot, but I do encourage developers to sit in on user testing because it's just mind-blowing when you're able to watch somebody struggle to use your app. It just gives you all kinds of information about how what you thought was so obvious or so simple actually wasn't intuitive to this other person. They're in a different situation. They may have different abilities. They may have different backgrounds. If you think back to that image where we showed people have different life experiences. So user testing, I think, is a big, important piece of that. So thankfully, during this conference, you're going to have the opportunity to hear about interesting ways to care more about your users. So Robin's talk is going to cover accessibility, which is really important and absolutely relevant to this. And Charlene's going to be speaking about understanding your users. I imagine, I'm sure that's going to be a very great talk. So these are, you have some opportunities here to delve deeper into that, which is really great. And then I also want to say that there's kind of the compassion applied to nice user interfaces and that. But as we talked about, technology is really powerful, and it can have a huge impact beyond what even we intend. Like, you can design an app that's really fun to use, so you apply your empathy to make it really fun and engaging, and people can't put it down. And then the problem is, people can't put it down. And so they're buried in their phones all the time, and they're not engaging with people. They're not having that interaction. And that's not great either, right? So I'd encourage you to consider the larger impact of your work. Are you creating things in the world that are making the world a better place, or maybe not? And I know that sounds pretty heavy, and you're like, I just need to have this job to pay the bills, and I can't even think about this. And I get that, and of course, that's why we started with self-compassion, because you have to take care of yourself first. But I'd also say that part of taking care of yourself is finding ways to live consistently with your values. And so it's important to think about what matters most to you and how that, whether or not you're able to apply that in your work. And there may be times where you take a job because you do need a job, and that's fine. But you intend maybe down the line to go beyond that and to find something that's more closely aligned with your values. And so I think you have an opportunity to always at least to plan ahead for that sort of thing. And so sometimes these are, obvious things, like if you're using user data in unethical ways, of course, that's not good. Some of them are kind of clear-cut, but some of them are a little bit interesting. So the Apple Vision Pro, they had released that promo video, and somebody tweeted this. It's a still. It's a little hard to see with the coloration, but it's basically like a father wearing the Vision Pro and playing with his kids. And the person tweeted, "This is just a great way to parent. That won't affect your children negatively at all." Little sarcasm there, because it does look a little weird, right? Because parents are supposed to be really engaged with their kids, and instead he's watching something, and it has his fake eyes there or whatever. It's a little bit odd, right? And although he stated it, this Joe guy stated it in kind of a sarcastic kind of way, I think there's something really deep here that's worth considering. And since you all may be working on apps in that realm, I think it's worth thinking about. So Elim Sakakis is this commentator who has a newsletter that I really like. He talks about the kind of ethical implications of technology. And he was responding to this image. He shared this image and then said, "The worst thing about the age of digital media will turn out to be how hard it became to look one another in the eye." And, you know, a lot of the stuff that I talk about with empathy and whatnot, I read about how important it is to be able to connect with somebody by making eye contact. And sure, like culturally, people aren't always comfortable with eye contact, and some people just on an individual basis aren't. So, you know, I'm not necessarily addressing that at the moment, but I'm just saying in general, people connect by looking into each other's eyes and forging that deep connection. And I sometimes struggle with eye contact myself, so I'm definitely sympathetic to it. But I also think that all these devices that are interfering with that are having an impact on how connected we feel to people. I also feel that, you know, events like this are so valuable and so important, and a lot of them haven't come back since the pandemic. And, you know, I think that it's partly inertia, it's partly just, you know, people are used to now being at home. Some people are still, you know, fearful, et cetera. Some people are taking reasonable precautions. There's all kinds of reasons, but I do think that it's important to think of ways we can come back together. One thing you might do is share your experience from this conference, like publicly, because like take pictures, use the hashtag, it's on the podium here, because I think that helps show people like, oh yeah, events are fun, I should get back out, or my company should sponsor an event, and people should get back in person, because it's so valuable, it's so important. I also want to give a shout out to this organization called All Tech is Human. What I like about them is they bring together all kinds of organizations that are working on this human side of technology that are from a bunch of different angles. So people who are thinking about like policy making in different countries, people who are thinking about you know, education systems, just the whole gamut of like how to support responsible tech. We have art, information science, international relations, environmental studies. I know, you know, Apple has been talking about caring about the environment and stuff, so there's progress there, philosophy, psychology, because, you know, it's a lot more than just computer science and engineering that's important. And so another piece of compassion is to respect and to welcome the viewpoints of people who don't code. I think a lot of times, you know, when I would pitch these talks early on of doing talks on compassion, I would have to kind of make it seem technical by saying, oh, I'll show code samples, et cetera, in order for anyone to even be interested. But the truth is that people who don't code at all and never have still have a lot of great insights to offer us. And we can learn a lot from them. And so I encourage you to kind of put aside some of the bias you may have against the non-technical people and open your mind to the fact that they actually may have a lot to offer. And so, you know, a big part of this, of how to decide how to apply compassion in your life, is getting in touch with your own core values. Because I'm not here to tell you what you should do or what you should build or anything like that. I think what matters is that you know what's important to you. And so one exercise I do in workshops sometimes is to think back, to figure out your core values, and we have prompting questions like, when was the time you felt most proud in your life? Who do you admire, and what are some of the traits that they exhibit? Those might be your values. What makes you angry? Sometimes the things that make you angry are because there's something that you value so much that it brings up that anger in you. You might also consider, if you only had 1 week to live, what would you do? Sometimes that goes the other direction and it's just like fun stuff, but then maybe you value fun or whatever. But I think it's important to reflect like this and to think, what do I really care about? What do I want my work to stand for? What do I want to build? What impact do I want to have on the world? And because developers are in such a powerful position, and I don't think they realize that a lot of the time, because, you know, sometimes we're more humble people, we can be at least, and we might not and maybe on the more introverted side, which is totally fine and is important in society to have, but we have so much power with these knowledge, skills, superpower things that we have. We can make a lot of positive impact if we really give it some thought. Okay, so we've covered the why, we've covered the what, we've covered the how. And, you know, my goal in sharing talks like this is to plant seeds and to hope that you continue this forward and it like sparks an interest and maybe you'll want to continue learning a bit more. So one thing that helped get some coverage on compassionate coding and spread the word was I gave a talk and I included this slide, and some people liked it and they made it their Twitter background and it spread. And the idea was, on the left here, I talk about kind of what the old tech used to be. It's all about ego, kind of the rock star programmer, being super smart, being elite coder, being competitive, and moving more towards humility, inclusion, cooperation, learning, and being a mentor. And at the time, this is kind of how I conceptualized it, but I realized that one problem with this is I was sort of using binary thinking, like we're replacing one thing with another. And so I've actually evolved a bit, my thinking on this has evolved a bit, and I think it's more about this. It's about finding balance in tech. So it's still important sometimes to have an ego. Our ego sometimes motivates us to do things, so it's not something we have to completely eliminate. Expertise is, of course, important. It's good to learn the technical skills that you're going to learn at this conference and elsewhere. Competition can actually be a good thing if it helps motivate people. Being smart, nothing wrong with that. And sometimes even being a rock star is fine. Like sometimes it feels good to help support your team and to be valued, etc. The thing is, we just need to balance it. So we do need humility. We do need people in tech, people building tech, to have some humility, to welcome different viewpoints, to question their beliefs. We need fresh perspectives. We need to welcome new people into the community who may not fit the stereotypes of what typically developers have been. We need collaboration, especially like in tech for sure, but also just across the world. The world, is getting smaller in the sense of we're so interconnected that we can't avoid like collaborating. Learning, so versus being smart, learning is this commitment to growth. So if you're worried always about looking smart, then you're gonna be afraid to make a mistake. You're going to feel like you always have to be perfect. But if you focus on learning instead and applying a growth mindset, then actually making a mistake can be a good thing because it can be a learning opportunity for you to grow. And then being a mentor, so giving back. So you've learned so much, and you have so much to offer no matter where you are in your journey. Even if you're just starting to learn to program, those little things you learn, you could maybe teach some grade school kids near you, like I've done that before, and that can be really rewarding. So again, I hope that you continue the journey because I've just been able to kind of plant some seeds and give you some little ideas here and there. But really, if you want to continue applying this, I recommend reading more about it. I have a newsletter where I talk about these sorts of things, and that can be helpful. At this conference in particular, I think Veena gave some great suggestions on what to do. I think staying curious about others, it's funny because we didn't coordinate, but it fits perfectly. Staying curious about others, I think offering help where you can. Maybe someone's struggling with a bug or an app store submission that you can help with. And definitely take breaks to recharge. So we talked about self-compassion. It's really important that you step back and take some time to relax and recover. And I'd also say that Janina, who introduced me, made this wonderful thread about 30 days of compassion, and she gives some very specific, great examples of things that you can do. So I recommend checking that out, following her for sure. And I want to end with this quote, which came from a meditation gardens near where I live in San Diego. When people speak of political, social, or international problems, they often do not realize that these conditions are nothing more than the accumulated thoughts and actions of millions of individuals. And the only way to change world conditions is to change ourselves. And so I share this because we're talking about, yes, becoming a better programmer, creating better products, making more money, using Revenue Cat, et cetera. But also, I think that when we have these little small acts of kindness, it can have a ripple effect that you have no idea how far it will extend and who you might impact. And I think what the world needs is more people kind of taking that first step, giving someone the benefit of the doubt, letting their guard down a bit, connecting with somebody outside their comfort zone. What kind of world could we build if individuals make that change? Food for thought. Okay, so thank you very much. I usually bring stickers. I don't have them because I didn't have as much notice with this one. But if you, tag me online with something you learned or a picture from the talk and send me your address, I'll mail you one. So thank you very much and see you around.